Helmuth Walter was a German engineer who pioneered research into rocket engines and gas turbines. His most noteworthy contributions were motors for the Messerschmitt Me-163, a rocket-powered interceptor aircraft, the only operational rocket-powered fighter aircraft in history, as well as the first piloted aircraft of any type to exceed 1,000 km per hour in level flight. After being introduced into service, the Me-163 was credited with the destruction of between 9 and 18 Allied aircraft against 10 losses. Aside from the actual combat losses incurred, numerous Me-163 pilots had been killed during testing and training flights. This high loss rate was, at least partially, a result of the later model's use of rocket propellant, which was not only highly volatile but also corrosive and hazardous to humans. Walter's other unique invention was the HWK 109-500. It was a self-contained, modular takeoff assist engine in a pod, able to produce 500 kg thrust for 30 seconds. After the fuel was expended, the pod was jettisoned and it returned to Earth by parachute. It entered service in 1942, and some 6,000 were built during the war. It was used extensively on a wide range of aircraft, especially the potentially underpowered when heavily laden with external ordnance like the Arado AR-234B jet bomber. In 1933, Walter worked on a new gas turbine at the shipyard in Kiel, and there his idea of a closed-circuit propulsion system was born. He dreamed of making a U-boat that would be driven by hydrogen peroxide in a stabilized form called perhydrol. The combustion of that fuel and oil was a complex one but held the promise of a smaller and lighter engines than normal U-boat diesel engines of that time. Also, boat of that design would not have to spend long hours on the surface to recharge batteries, which was a major plus. In October of 1934, he proposed incredible proposals to the German Navy High Command. An U-boat of 300 tons with the maximum surface speed of 26 knots and amazing underwater speed of 30 knots. That boat was to have endurance of some 2,500 miles at 15 knots or 500 miles submerged at that speed. The current U-boats of that time had a maximum surface speed of 11 knots and could make about 7 knots underwater. His ideas were rejected promptly by the Navy in 1934 as too unconventional and fanciful, but Walter did not give up, and in 1937 he showed his revised plans to Karl Donitz, who was at that time commander of a U-boat training flotilla. Donitz was so impressed with the proposal that he got it into the proper channels, and in 1939 a design contract was made for a small research vessel, called V-80, based on that design. The V-80 boat was designed by Walter in Kiel and built in the greatest secrecy on a slipway surrounded by a large fence. The boat was launched on April 14, 1940, and the test results carried out during the following spring with Walter himself at the controls were sensational. The boat reached more than 23 knots submerged, which was more than double the underwater speed of any submarine in the world at that time. Modern nuclear-powered fast-attack submarines like the Soviet Alpha class are said to reach some 42 knots. The German Navy was so impressed by the test results from V-80 that they suggested immediate construction of 6 coastal boats based on that design, but many in the U-boat department questioned that a real operational boat could be built on this system, and also that the shipyards were badly needed to continue delivering the conventional German U-boats that seemed to be doing what was required of them at that time. Following the success of the V-80's trials, Walter contacted Karl Donitz in January 1942, who enthusiastically embraced the idea and requested that these submarines be developed as quickly as possible. An initial order was placed in summer 1942 for 4 Type 17 development submarines. The Type 17 U-boats were small coastal submarines that used a high-test peroxide propulsion system, which offered a combination of air-independent propulsion and high submerged speeds. Of these, U-792 and U-793 achieved 20 knots submerged. Later, the U-793 achieved a submerged speed of 22 knots in March 1944 with Admiral Donitz aboard. In June 1944, the U-792 achieved 25 knots over a measured mile. But it is also true that these submarines were found to be very hard to handle at high speed, and were plagued by numerous mechanical problems, low efficiency, and the fact that a significant amount of power was lost due to increased back pressure on the exhaust at depth. Also, the length-to-beam ratio was too low, resulting in an unnecessarily high drag. It also became clear that in spite of the advanced planning, the new Walter U-boat was not going to be operational in any foreseeable future. Moreover, any prospect on the Walter project would require a diversion of the shipyard resources from Type 7 and 9 building, which was at that time out of question. Admiral Werner Fuchs, the head of the Navy's construction office, argued that introducing a new type of U-boat would hinder current production efforts, but Dönitz argued the case for them, and on January 4, 1943, the Kriegsmarine ordered 24 Type 17 submarines. It was decided to carry on the Walter projects, but on a limited research scale. However, the German shipyards were already struggling to cope with orders for the Type 21 submarines, and the Navy reduced the order to 6. Altogether, 7 Type 17 boats were completed between 1943 and 1945. The Type 17 submarine was 39 meters long overall, with a beam of 4.5 meters and a draft of 4.3 meters. She was assessed at 304 long tons submerged. The submarine was powered by one 8-cylinder 4-stroke diesel engine producing a total of 210 metric horsepower for use while surfaced, and 2 Walter gas turbines producing a total of 5,000 metric horsepower for use while submerged. The submarine had a maximum surface speed of 9 knots and a maximum submerged speed of 25 knots when submerged. The U-boat could operate for 127 nautical miles at 20 knots, and when surfaced, she could travel 1.840 nautical miles at 9 knots. The submarine was fitted with 2 torpedo tubes and 4 torpedoes. The boat had a complement of 12 men. None of them were ever used in combat. All completed Type 17 boats were scuttled by their crews at the end of World War II. Walter boats were extremely complex to build and maintain, also they relied on uncertain supply of perhydrol. The fuel was highly flammable, and the British abandoned the idea after the war as too dangerous for combat vessels. No Walter boats ever saw enemy action, and no such boats even entered frontal service. Thus the Walter boats did not have any real effect on the war, but they were a very interesting development, and as Admiral Dönitz stated after his arrest, with a little courage and vision they could have been in service 2 years earlier, and then they certainly would have had enormous impact on the war. In 1945, Walter was awarded the Knight's Cross for his wartime service. He was captured by a British army, and his factory was then investigated by 30 Assault Unit, a unit of Royal Marines which had been established by James Bond author Ian Fleming. The end of the war saw all of his research materials confiscated by the British military, and Walter and his colleagues taken to the UK to work for the Royal Navy. Professor Helmuth Walter passed away in 1980, then 80 years old. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.